Ronnie, what's up?
Ronald, how we doing?
Not bad. You know, I've been trying to figure out a car to get, you know, something I can afford, something to fit my budget. And then I was trying to decide, like, am I going to own this thing? Am I going to lease it or whatever? Then I thought, this is just really complicated, Ronnie.
That's a great topic, and I know so many people debate the buy or lease thing, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, so Ronnie, I'm at the dealership and I've got this car that I want to get, but I'm trying to decide like low monthly payment with a lease, or do I buy this thing? I don't know if I have enough money to buy the car outright. Should I finance it? I mean, what do you think I should do?
So I think a lot of this needs to decide on whether or not you're going to take a practical approach or an emotional approach. The concept of buying and leasing isn't as simple as just what makes the most financial sense. A lot of it is what makes the most sense for you and what you're hopefully getting after. Meaning, with a lease, you have to give it back at the end of it.
Yeah.
When you buy it, you don't. And so I think that's the first place that you should start when you're looking at this.
Yeah, so how long are you gonna have this car? You know, these leases are typically, 3-4 years? So if you know you're gonna change your car in 3-4 years, maybe you could lean towards a lease. But Ronnie, I think a really key point when I was thinking about it is ultimately when you're leasing a car, all you're really doing is financing part of the car. Because at the end of it, you're not going to own the car, but you have a right to buy it at a certain price.
Right.
So that's the residual value. So basically that delta between the purchase price now and what the value is at the end of it, you're financing that through your lease payment. So you got to really think long and hard. You're not going to own this thing in a few years unless you cough up some more money.
You know, I've leased a car one time. It was through a business that I had a partner on, and we decided to have the cars as part of the business. So it was really more of a business car, but I've never personally leased a car other than for a business. I'm a pride of ownership guy. I like to own things. I like to feel like it's mine, and with leasing, it just feels like I'm renting it and I got to give it back. And I take good care of my cars. I don't drive a ton of miles, so to me, owning makes better sense.
I've bought cars and I've leased cars. Sometimes I like leasing cars because sometimes I just want to try it because I'm not sure. Like I do like to keep cars for the long term if I really love them, but if I'm not really into the car, I might just want to lease it for a few years. Then I don't feel like the risk of if something happens to it, I get it fixed, I just turn it in a few years. But if I bought it, I really get into the cars and I really love them, and so it really hurts if it gets wrecked or damaged or something like that. But if I lease it, I feel like, hey, I got my time with the car, I got to turn it back in. Versus if I own it, I'm probably going to keep it for a longer period of time.
So if it's about a monthly payment, if you're going to own it for a long term, you know, what you need to understand is the cost of ownership, right? So if the reason that they lease them for 3 or 4 years is because most warranties are 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
But if now you're going to own this car for 6 or 7 or 8 years, you need to decide, what if this car breaks down? Do I really want to be responsible to fix it? And if not, you need to factor in the cost of an extended warranty into your cost of that car.
Also, you got to think about the mileage. So these leases, there's normally a limitation. To get a decent priced lease, you're talking about driving probably less than 12,000 miles a year, maybe 10,000 miles a year. A lot of times, you don't think about it, but people are driving 15, 20,000 miles a year.
Yeah.
If you do that, at the end of the lease, you're going to owe a ton of money because you got extra mileage charges.
Right.
So be really, really careful. And that's what I'm thinking about and trying to decide if I'm going to own or lease this thing is really how many miles I'm going to drive this car.
I mean, candidly, a lot of it's hard to forecast because 3 or 4 years down the road, we don't have any idea. We may change jobs, careers, cities, states. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that come into it. So that's why I go back to my first question. Mentally, do you want to feel like you own the car, or do you want to feel like you have the right to own the car? It's a personal preference.
Well, and there are some advantages to leasing a car. One is that typically the lease payment's going to be less than if you're financing it, because once again, you're only financing that portion of the value of the car. The other advantage is at the end of it, you don't have the risk of like having to go out and sell this car. And a lot of times you drive a car and the value goes down a lot, and now you got to go find a buyer and you could be underwater on the value. So at the end of it, if you can just turn it in. Another advantage is like if you're just one of those people like, I got to have a new car every 3-4 years.
Right.
And maybe you just don't have the cash to do that, and new cars are your thing, maybe you don't want the risk of the maintenance issues after 3 or 4 years, then leasing is probably the way to go.
I lean both ways on this, but I think one thing that people don't also think about is when you lease a car, if you happen to get in an accident and the car, you know, now has a record, if you will. You know, it's on a Carfax saying that it's a wrecked car. You know, when you lease it, it doesn't affect your ability to just give it back at the end of it, as long as it was repaired in like order. But if you go to sell that car,
it could be less value.
Exactly. You could have a less value. value. So, typically with the more expensive car, that becomes a factor because they depreciate faster, number one, but also if you get in an accident, less people that drive those Highline cars are tolerant of cars that have accident records on it.
There's this whole financial philosophy around that cars are depreciating assets. You really want to own something that's just depreciating over time, and that really you should just be essentially renting that thing and letting somebody else take the risk of it at the end of it. That's one advantage of leasing the car. Another thing too, a lot of people nowadays, they got a side hustle like their own business. You can actually at times write this off. You can reduce your taxes by leasing the car instead of buying it.
Although, when you own the car, you're probably going to take better care of it than if you rent the car. And so there's a high probability that that car is going to last longer and that you'll be able to keep it. And there is an inflection point where, the depreciation that Ronald talks about goes away. And at some point that car depreciates slower and you'll actually be better off if you're going to keep it long term.
Ronnie, we're both car guys. We love cars. And if you really like a car, you keep it for many, many years. And you got me convinced what I really should do. I'm going to find a car that I can afford to just buy with cash. Even if it's a less valuable car, I'd rather do that because then I can keep it for a really long period of time. I don't have the risk of the financing or the lease or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then if I don't want it anymore, I can just go and sell it.
There are reasons people lease and there are reasons people buy. But if you don't have a business and you take a great, emotional pride in that ownership, I think there's a lot of value into buying the car, and there's nothing wrong with financing the car. If you can't afford the car and you're solely basing it on a payment and you don't have the ability to run that car through a business, my recommendation is don't buy a car more expensive than you can afford, and so make sure the payment on a purchase is something that you can afford, because if you end up only doing it based on what a lease is, you're not going to be able to buy that car at the end of it because that residual value will be too high.
If you have that financial philosophy that you really only buy things and own things if they're appreciating assets and you really don't have an emotional attachment to something, leasing is perfectly fine, but you got to read the fine print. I would never recommend leasing unless you're actually, you know math pretty well, kind of financial terms, because they're very, very complicated.
Well, I think it would be really interesting to go look at some cars and talk about it. You're in the market, so let's go take a little field trip.
Let's do it. Ronnie, I don't know, man. This is tough. I love this car, but I'm trying to decide. Price is $20,000, or they said I could finance it for $400 a month, but then the lease is so little. It's $250, $300 a month. I don't know, Ronnie. What do you think?
Well, so when you finance it for $400 a month, how much do you have to put down on it?
Oh man, I don't remember. That's a good point. I need to figure that out.
And then if you leased it for $250, how much money do you have to put down? Because I think we need to understand how much cash you have to outlay.
Yep.
And then what that means in the payment, and then how long are you going to keep this thing?
Yeah, that's right. I think I got to do my homework. I got to go back and do all the calculations, figure out what's best for me financially with this car, and how long am I going to have it? When they said the lease, it was 42 months. How many is that? 3.5 years? Yeah.
And then you give it back.
I know.
That's the downside
and
of the
they said
leasing.
something about 10,000 miles a year is all I could drive it. Man, some of these long road trips I do. I don't know. I don't know. At the end of it, I could be owing a lot of money with extra mileage fees or whatnot, but I love this car. Maybe I can figure out the extra $150 a month and just finance it.
Again, for our viewers, these are the things that Ronald's debating, and you're probably debating too, as to how much money you have to put down, if that's going to get you a lower payment. But if you're going to keep the car long term, like my friend Ronald, there aren't many that have this awesome pinstripe on it. and I think if you're going to keep
you're knocking my pinstripe.
I think it's very stylish.
Yeah.
But if you're going to keep this thing long term, you got to think about that, because if you lease it, you're giving it back, or you could buy it, but
Yeah, but I like my new cars, so I'm planning. 3.5 years is probably going to end up getting a new car anyway. So I don't know, man. It is tough. All I can say is this is a very tough decision. You don't want it to be an emotional decision, and you don't want to feel pushed. Always be willing to walk away.
Definitely.
And just go do your math, figure it out, and when you're ready to make that decision and you can afford it, go for it.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Ronald, which, look, I hope we're getting out here in a new car. Otherwise, I got to go back in this clunker.
And I hope it's this one.
Well, that was super fun. I like car shopping,
Oh my
especially
gosh,
with your
man.
money.
Going out and looking at cars every day, I could do that. But I want to hear from you all. You've had to make this decision before. Maybe you're buying your first car, but maybe bought many cars. Let us know. And then check out some of our other episodes. We've got some other car episodes. We'd love you to watch them. Ronnie, I'm gonna go get that car.
All right, well, I read that fine print, all right?
I will. Don't worry.
All right, see you, Ronald.
See ya.